Thank you, Mandy and Heidi, very gracious words. Thank you all for having me here this evening. It's a great honor and a delight to be here, to be hosted by Rockbridge and by the Elliott Society. I believe greatly in what they were both doing, and I'm just very, very honored in what they are working to do to pour into the world, especially through the children as well. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. And wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives in the dearest freshness deep down things, and though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Gerald Manley Hopkins, God's grandeur. The spirituality of wonder knows the world is charged with grace, writes Brennan Manning, and that while sin and war, disease and death are terribly real, God's loving presence and power in our midst are even more real. C.S. Lewis famously identified that pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world, and I would say in turn that wonder is the literal opening of our eyes. Tonight I would like to share with you how my world was charged with the grandeur and grace of God, and even the mere glints of beauty in the midst of suffering point to the really real. How was I transformed? By the astonishing beauty of God? By the element of surprise, or should I say elemental surprise? It was coming face to face with truth and immersed in beauty that had led me to be so surprised by Oxford and attending there. But that the art of learning will inevitably lead to the art of living and dying and life eternal, and to the great artist. I was going to read for you a short opening section from my book, Surprised by Oxford, to give you some context, and I'll back up then and share with you some of my background as we continue this evening together. As an undergraduate in Canada, I knew of only one evangelical, and although I did not really understand this nomenclature at the time, categorically this person would have annoyed me, except for the fact that I respected him so much. He was my 17th century poetry professor, an esteemed scholar, and pillar of the community. Quite elderly, he could wax on a bit in class while he incessantly shuffled his notes, which were penciled out in longhand. His popular seminars filled to overflowing, and always the perfect gentleman, he dressed in a suit for lectures and in button-down and cardigan for office hours. I had never heard him say a gruff word, let alone curse before, which is why what he said to me in the hallway after class one day stopped me dead in my tracks. Typical sycophantic senior, I worked up my nerve to ask him what he thought of my presentation on the metaphysical poet John Donne. No easy task, as my assigned poem was Donne's Holy Sonnet, 14. Batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like a usurped town to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your viceroy and me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. I gave what I thought was a brilliant analysis of the domination of rape imagery in the poem. I argued that the poem illustrated a classic subversion by the dominant patriarchy, whether it be the church or the priest or the male construction of God and Savior, of the threat posed by maternal power or the feminine spiritus. I thought myself quite clever. Thank you very much. And I wanted to hear his take before the grade was finalized. Dr. Devoe paused and looked thoughtful, and then resumed walking. I kept pace beside him, expectant. Without missing a step, he said quietly, "It is an interesting reading of the poem, Miss Drake, and you obviously have command of the language, but you didn't seem to get the point. To really get at the essential grappling. You didn't untie that subtle knot, which makes us man, so central to Donne's spiritual pilgrimage." He quickened his stride. "The truth is in the paradox, Miss Drake. Anything not done in submission to God, anything not done to the glory of God, is doomed to failure, frailty, and futility. This is the unholy trinity we humans fear most, and we should, for we entertain it all the time at the pain and expense of not knowing the real one." Huh? I managed to puff, for Dr. Devoe was a hard person to keep up with physically and mentally. Dr. Devoe stopped and looked at me hard. He leaned in and whispered, "The rest is all BS, Miss Drake. It's as simple as that. Your purpose here in life is to discern the real thing from the BS, and then to choose the non-BS. Think of the opportunity that God has given you to study as the means by which to attain your own personal BS detector. Sometimes that will not be particularly difficult, because those who proclaim to know the truth, well-intentioned or not, are spewing the most BS. But you will know when you have been properly ravished, and then you'll see how the entire world is eyeball deep in it, and that we choose it, every day. But the good news is that although we struggle with it, there is a way out. Yes, there is a very worthy antidote and option to all the BS." I stood there agape. As Dr. Devoe strode away, I had no idea what he had been talking about, or that he can even talk like that. I was not sure if I should be offended or not. Yet something went off far in the back of my mind. Or was it my heart? I could not tell, but it felt like the small click of a combination lock. Gee, I thought I better go back and reread the poem. And then I thought, to my great dismay, I'm sure I received an F. And fortunately, I did not fail the course, and I worked extremely hard, harder for Dr. Devoe than for any of my other professors, and I received the thrill of that final A, and after grades were posted, I went to see him. Christmas break was about to start, and I could not get the problem of the BS detector out of my head. Was it possible that Donne's famous maxim, "doubt wisely," lay back to back with the necessity of believing wisely, too? Were the two interlocked in that subtle knot that defines our humanity? I knocked on Dr. Devoe's door, but there was no answer, and I was met by the secretary's dismayed face when I asked when Dr. Devoe might be in. "Haven't you heard?" she asked. "Dr. Devoe passed away just after finals week. He tallied all the grades and then fell asleep in his chair, and his wife found him the next morning. Poor thing, cold, pencil in hand. The funeral is next week if you'd like to attend." I'll have to think of that while I'm grading my own papers. My memory of Dr. Devoe was from the last day of our seminar. The class's token joker accidentally spilled his coffee all over Dr. Devoe's meticulously handwritten notes. A flutter of confusion ensued as the young man, flustered and red-faced for once, apologized profusely, while several of us sprang forward with Kleenex, sheets of paper, a sock, whatever was at hand. And I watched Dr. Devoe save what was left of his ancient notes without saying a word. We all sat still, too stunned to speak, and suddenly he seemed so much older, so vulnerable. I had not noticed before that his hands shook. Then he looked up at us and smiling said, "No harm done. I always thought my notes too dry for their own good anyway." And with a little faith, nothing is irreparable. Now let's see what our dear man, Herbert, would have to say about that, and please turn next to his poem, The Caller. As that undergraduate, my background was like so many others. I knew a lot of astrology and very little theology. Middle-class background, as I said to students today. Middle-sized family, middle-sized town, middle-sized car. My father had been a self-made man. He'd grown up very poor. His father had left him after beating his mom on Christmas Eve and leaving her. And he'd grown up without a father and gone to school during the Depression era without shoes. He never finished high school because he was helping his mom with the family business. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps and ended up becoming very successful. And by the time I came along, he married my mother, who had also come from an immigrant family. Hungarian was their first language. And she very much valued education and reading and that sort of thing, but neither one had gone to college or had those opportunities. And by the time I came along, my father was quite successful. We were affluent and had a very comfortable life with my older brother and my younger sister on the way. When my father's business fell apart and he was charged with fraud and he lost his dignity as well as his mind and suffered a nervous breakdown and ended up going in and out of institutions and help and eventually left our lives in many ways, and when he returned he was volatile or difficult and lost. And I didn't know him very much except for this man that I couldn't depend on or was unpredictable, and essentially was raised by a single mom who, as I said, was loving and singing musicals and caring and kind, but working herself to the bone and drinking herself to sleep every night to manage. When I got older and had my own children, I thought, I would have drank more. By the time I was looking at attending college, we had lost our home several times over. I was in a very living in subsidized housing. I was blessed with amazing teachers, and I had a rare opportunity to leave the poor neighborhood I was in and attend a school actually much like Rockbridge, without the Christian element to it, but a school that had a gifted program. And opened doors of wonder to me with amazing teachers, one in particularly who was a Christian. I just didn't really know what that was at the time, because we all know that also if you're from a mid-sized town and mid-sized family and mid-sized everything and fairly mediocre, right, that our knowledge of Jesus and Christianity is fairly mediocre too. It's what we learn from the media. I had no idea of a personal relationship. I had no understanding of the Bible. I stand before you as a perfect example of someone who had 20 years of public school education and never cracked open a Bible. I had a little bit of understanding in Hungarian and Latin from my grandparents, but when they passed, that was gone. My mom was loosely Catholic, but grew increasingly cynical as she grew increasingly weary. And I certainly wasn't going to trust an eternal father when an earthly father one was not trustworthy. I worked several jobs. I worked all night to get the A's, to get the scholarship, to get onto the full ride for undergraduate. It was busy, 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 like we all are in our culture, our North American culture, with the opiate of busyness. And I would have described my family. I was close to my siblings. I loved my mom. I enjoyed school. And I really came from an area in Canada, in particularly, where people feel they don't really need God. It's quite comfortable. Right? It's like not needing God because you're good. Never asked any questions. My idea of a Christian was what my big brother would say, was basically a big-haired TV evangelist who takes your money. There was no other reason to know, and the Bible stories were alien, and I was very much, as Eliot would say, part of that dissociation of sensibility, right? Part of that modern society that does not recognize the language of illusion that our students who know the Bible or who have a faith are humanical thinkers. They live and breathe reading the seen and the unseen. But most of culture in our North American society is painfully literal and spiritually illiterate. But I was going to be self-made too, and self-sufficient, and if I worked hard enough, I could do anything. And I was very busy. And when I won the full scholarship to Oxford University, it was actually a bit of an inconvenience. I was engaged already to my college sweetheart, who was right-out atheist. And I'd had my life planned and mapped out, but this was a Commonwealth scholarship. It was the most money I'd ever seen in my life. I could send some of it home, and it was Oxford. And I thought, well, okay. And my mom was, go. And I still remember her face pressed in the glass at the little London, Ontario airport. Because yes, I come from London, Ontario, Canada, which is like a little London, England, with a little Thames River and a little Stratford-upon-Avon, and all the colonial anxiety. Just a lot more snow. I would have described my family as loving enough to get along, but broken enough not to deserve God's attention. When I got to Oxford, what surprised me there were several things. Things that we strive, I think, at places like Rockbridge or at New College Franklin, where I now have the immense blessing to be, of bringing into our classrooms the intersection of beauty and truth and deeper purpose in fellowship of learning. As Dorothy Sayers says in her Lost Tools of Learning, our culture fails lamentably on the whole in teaching children how to think. They learn everything except the art of learning. As a romantic literature student at Oxford University, I was moved by the final lines spoken by the enduring urn of John Keats's famous ode, "Beauty is truth and truth is beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." Truth is beautiful and beauty is truth, but not in the way we superficially conceive of beauty and not in the ways we superficially conceive of truth. And so first, God gets our attention and lays us open by the beauty of creation. But then he adds wonder upon wonder by creating us in his image so that we can create. And the beauty of creating ranges, yes, from art, but also from the art of living and seeking and sowing a beautiful and true life, and the art of dying, which we tend not to think about in our culture, in our very antiseptic culture. The reaping and resting in the culmination of beauty being paradise. So we've seen first and elementally how God has our attention with the beauty of creation and then maintains the holding and our holding of our attention through our own God-given image-bearing mimetic dignity and the beauty of our own creating. And Oxford surprised me with this entwining of beauty and truth and with what endures with roots that lie, as Tolkien says, too deep for frost. And so initially then, this girl had never really cracked it in the Bible, met there other Christians, people who articulated the gospel. We always assume people know the gospel, but they don't. Right? William Drummond says, never give people a thimbleful of gospel, give them the whole thing. I was studying world religions for my M.Phil at the time, and I was really interested in mythologies and things like that, and opening up, of course, like what Tolkien and Lewis were looking at as well. Where do all those things point? What are they causing us to long for, and where are they directing us in that longing? So there was a beautiful and truthful Trinity that happened there for me first. And this is not to romanticize Oxford. It was just actually that I had been like a hummingbird that hit the glass hard. I had been so busy and so self-sufficient and spinning so many plates and thinking I could do all of this on my own. And the Brits have this wild and crazy idea that actually when you're studying and you're a student, you shouldn't do other work. The British Academy doesn't allow you to work. The Commonwealth Scholarship doesn't allow you to work. They are supporting you, like a patron system, in the art of learning. And I had all this time. I no longer had this opiate of busyness. Time to contemplate, time to think, time to walk. Everyone walks there. It gives you a chance to digest and walk with friends and think about ideas. Time to go to the pub, right? To discuss some things drunk, some things sober, like the Persians. Time to have fellowship and conversation, tutorials to defend our ideas, to take responsibility for the things we say, not to hide behind the anonymity of social media. To respond with trust and with respect, to practice holy listening, and to practice engagement. To have, as I mentioned to the students earlier today, the Aristotelian notion of being able to entertain many ideas but not necessarily accept them. And to do so with civility. I was introduced to a trinity of wisdom, wit, and wonder. Wisdom being the beauty of spiritual thinking. The difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge not only being the appropriate application, wisdom not only being the appropriate application of knowledge, but of thinking about how the pattern works of second chances in the Bible that allow us to see how wisdom is gained. It was the truth that was coming up from the John Donne sonnet, the grappling with God, the paradox of asking to be battered and knocked and shined and made new in order to actually be more in the likeness of our Creator. We know that a silversmith, for instance, at the time, knew that his work was done when he could bring the work out of the fire and see his own reflection in it. That was when the burnishing had met its end and its goal and its telos. I was challenged to think about what was really true. More than facts, what is discernment? To sit with paradox, to think about what I believe and what I don't believe. Sure, there were things like the C.S. Lewis Society and evensong every night at the colleges where the bells ring, and never underestimate bell ringing, right? For whom the bell tolls, if we're going to get into Donne and Milton, but also just that notion of the music and hum and rhythm of our lives. These subtle ways of thinking about to whom we bend our knee, to whom we answer, because we all answer to something. I was also moved by wit. And I don't just mean a great clashing of swords. And the kind of wit that disables, but the kind of wit that we see in the Word of God, the two-edged sword, the one that's able to cut down and lay bare, the one that's able to show us what's really true. The beauty of relational being as illustrated by wit, how fellowship differs from friendship, Fellowship runs deeper and clearer and pure, and you can kithe high and low in it. We are commanded to love each other even when we're not in the mood. There's a different safety and a clear truth in fellowship. C.S. Lewis does a wonderful study of words, and he actually does a long treatise on the history and meaning of wit. The Anglo-Saxon wit, or gewit, it means mind or reason or intelligence. He writes, rational creatures are those to whom God has given wit. And being witty in its old sense was also to be wise. And the turn of the phrase, the double-edged gleaming, had a beauty from how it was wrought. Wit doesn't strike down or mock, but illuminates and lifts up. True wit reveals truth, often with even a gentleness or a playfulness, and it opens the eyes as well as the mouth. There was so much wit among my friends at Oxford, especially my Christian friends, so much delight in words, delight in argument. It's like Chesterton, right? Who says Satan falls due to his own gravity. He takes himself so seriously. But a way of stopping and helping one think of a position with gentleness. It was a regular component of conversations in pubs and libraries and colleges. I had a wonderful chaplain at St. Peter's College, Christopher Jones, a very, very dear man. And he was eventually diagnosed with bowel cancer. And he had just had a surgery, and we were toasting him one evening after dinner and praying for him. And we raised our toasts and wished him well. His response was, well, I guess in the punctuation of life I had always considered myself a colon, but now I'm a semicolon. He was terminal at the time. Wit has a sort of beauty. A grace has an element of wit. Not trite or prideful, not just a play or a turn of words, but a way of flipping the coin so we see the other side. And that there's an intake of breath that betrays the thrill of the gift. It's evocative of the wit of Jesus, never mocking, always inviting us to the truth. Like how he asks questions and invites us on a quest with him. Take, for example, the story of Jesus calling Philip, and through Philip, thereby calling Nathanael. And this is what I loved about the Bible, was I actually originally sat down and read it out of pure cynicism and the desire to use it as fodder against my ridiculously stupid innate friends who were Christians. I'm going to read this book, and I'm actually going to show you that it's stupid. It's irrelevant. It's out of date. It's not relevant. C.S. Lewis tells us over and over again that when he began the Mere Christianity and originally wrote the letters for the BBC, or the broadcast for the BBC, that people don't see the relevance of faith to their lives. How does it bear any relevance to suffering or paying my rent or being in the world or dealing with any of my disappointments? But as I read the Bible more and more, it was actually incredibly inconvenient because I began to realize from Genesis to Revelation how everything played out and how there was some of us in everyone, and there was a character in there for everyone, and every part of our facets of ourselves was in there, in the stories and in the people and in the ways that Jesus heals paralysis, physical and spiritual, heals blindness, literal and metaphorical. We are all the woman at the well. We are all the thief on the cross. There are elements of us in all of these people. And coming from little London, Ontario, I was struck by the story. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." And now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Wow, imagine Nathanael's wonder. Jesus identifies him with the salutation, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit, in whom there is no lie, no guile." It is an inside joke between them, so seriously funny that it stuns Nathanael into conversion from dismissal, even mockery, to reverence. Wit here shows how truth beckons to truth. Jesus at times is incredibly witty, as is the Apostle Paul, but that's a different talk. The fruits of the Spirit against which there's no law when you're in prison. Spiritual thinking of wisdom, the relational connection through word and of words with wit and wonder. The beauty of wonder. How wonder arises from how indeed all joy reminds and murmurs of the mystery of God. As Samuel Johnson said, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. Wonder works through serendipity on this life pilgrimage. On the little and large ways we are startled out of ourselves, made to see the abnormal as normal, the ways we are amazed and astonished by the intricate design of God's plan, from cells to stars. And this is what I love, the wonder that's being inserted in places that are teaching, like Rockbridge, at New College, in the places that we look to insert wonder where it's not deadened or denied or dismissed or left out, when we homeschool our children and operate according to wonder. Yes, Jesus did miracles of immense wonder, but the greatest wonder itself was the resurrection. But what if these signs are imagined, not real? The configurations of a mind maddened by the need to matter? What if there is nothing? What if it all means nothing, Dr. Weber? As my students like to ask. Okay. But what if it does? What if we have horribly, grievously underestimated it all? Lewis again wrote a letter on exactly this point to his student Sheldon Van Auken, the author of A Severe Mercy. And this is again another wonderful, amazing circle of grace that we see at work in our lives when we look back at retrospect with a different pair of eyes. A friend gave me A Severe Mercy to read before I was a Christian. That book should always come, if you're not familiar with it, with a very large box of Kleenex. But that being said, it was a very, very moving book. It chronicles his conversion and his wives. What is interesting is then Van Auken asked for permission to include a letter. He was a student of Lewis's, that Lewis had penned to him in a pamphlet he wrote about the faith, a small pamphlet called Encounter with Light. And this pamphlet was distributed by the Wade Center. It was actually published by Harold Shaw. Harold and Lucy Shaw, Lucy the poet, the Waite Center at Wheaton College, which is the Center for Studying the Inklings. This would be the very same little pamphlet that was innocuously slipped to me by another friend to read at my dangerous leisure. Because heaven forbid we allow our students and children to have time. Whilst a student homesick and longing, like all of us, to hold beauty in our soul's arms. Little me sitting alone and unimportantly unnoticed, unremarkable, so I thought, in a tiny sparse dorm room with a slanted floor in an Oxford college, a poor scholarship student long ago read this. The magnanimity, the generosity, which will trust on a reasonable probability is required of us, says Louis de Vanaken. Like how we trust the loyalty of a friend, right? But supposing one believed and was wrong after all, why then you would have paid the universe a compliment it doesn't deserve. That seemed a pretty decent risk for me. And if such a mistake were not distressing enough, he continues, there is still hope in the error, for your error would have been would be so much more interesting and important than the reality. And yet, how could that be? How can an idiotic universe have produced creatures whose mere dreams are so much stronger, better, subtler than itself? The wonder of dreams, the connection of consciousnesses, both independent and entwined. The Bible itself is full of dreams. The whole nativity story is stitched together with dreams. Every action point is dreamt. The wonder of voices carrying across the years, geographies, stories, identities, the wonder of everything intricate and connected, counted and dear, the meaning of it all. And like Goethe's claim, I have not the imagination for reality. I've written for you a rhetorical question about the poesis of God, or rather a rhetorical question posed as a poem, or perhaps a poetic rhetorical question. Regardless, it can all be held tightly together as done already made quite clear for us in an open poem. We tend to think that generosity cannot be, that meaning and purpose, even eternity, must be a trick, a turncoat dependent on the bearer. Certainly the amazement of color, the crimson swoop of cardinal against every kind of green. And where green goes black, the doe rattles, shadows with dappled fawn buoyant at her side. The creek's kaleidoscope shifting past pebbled shore where taupe toad blends among his stony brethren. Who is to say that leaf twirling upon treetop is not to attract my attention? What if the oriole's bold song, how outrageous is orange, that forces my eyes from my work, distracts me right back to where I belong? A tiny spider drops by its string in front of me from God knows where. And God knows where, and what, and when, and everything, and who I am, and why I'm here, and where I will go. And perhaps that is why he puts on such an unbelievable show. The greatest wonder, right, the eucatastrophe is the resurrection. That speaks into our weariness and that all things prepare us for, including trauma, perhaps the most. Ruth Bell Graham writes a beautiful poem about Jesus weeping. She's not as known for her poetry and her journal entries, being Billy Graham's wife and busy with their children in that ministry, but her poetry is beautiful. And Jan Karen actually collects it and comments on it because it moved her so much. She gives us a way of thinking about this wonder. That shortest line in the Bible, Jesus wept, and challenges us to think about it in a different, spiritually witty way. Jesus wept. But why? Knowing what lay ahead, moments away, was it because he had not come when he heard Lazarus might die? Lazarus was dead. Was it sympathy with their raw grief? Faith's impotent lack? Or could it be because he had to bring him back? Travel with me now from those Oxford days as a student startled into beauty and truth, wakened from the slumber of distraction, and closer to the present time. Long after I married actually in Washington, D.C. Mark Dever married my husband and I, Capitol Hill Baptist Church. It's a fun circle of grace to be here. That church took me in when I came here, and I had never been to the States, lived in the city before in the States. An amazing church. You can actually pray for my husband right now because he's at home with all the boys. I'm here with my daughter, and it's just such a nicer smelling trip. There's a reason why boys and noise rhymes, but I digress. It's a quieter trip too. I've relocated to the States, traveled and taught for 30 years, started a family. But a few years ago, about a year ago, we moved to the Nashville, Tennessee area. And this is just before this, a couple of years before that, when we had still not traded the pre-COVID busy city life for the post-COVID rural quiet. Down the tunnel of wonder we all travel, and in the poetic math, the spiritual thinking, that was perfectly timed for the tunnel, by which we learn to number our days. Do you not know, have you not heard? Funny how some of the most momentous things happen when you are doing the most mundane of tasks. Where does the line blur between the moment and the momentous? Or when does one become the other? When does a moment become anointed? How does it move from the near unconscious, smooth assumption that one undertaking will follow another, to the arresting of time, space, thought, breath? Trauma, impact, accident, cruelty, misfortune, all things have this effect, but wonder does too. And it trails tendrils of awe in that old sense of the word, in its original meaning, in the invocation of both fear and amazement, terror and wonder. The sublime. Again, such paradox. This taking of the breath by the same hand that gave it to us. How to find words for this force that gives and takes away, whose ways are mysterious and whose peace surpasses all understanding. I stand stock still in the kitchen, a bunch of bananas clutched in one hand and a tinsely bag of goldfish crackers crinkling in the other, and under my arm is tucked a roll of holly patterned wrapping paper, and my knee cuts against the hard edge of a box of diapers. But I don't move. Only moments before, I had been unloading groceries from the car, but not just any groceries, Christmas groceries. Right? Groceries for parties and school events, large family dinners, days upon baking, for hosting reams of international homesick students to our home who eat through everything like termites. I've hauled in loads of flour and eggs and baking soda and clinking jars of maraschino cherries. And a giant frozen turkey precariously set down in the unloading rush now rolls off my counter with a bang, just missing the few extra boxes of chocolates I'd picked up as last-minute gifts. I've been immersed in my equivalent of hunting and gathering for my family, and I stand there sweating along with my floored turkey. The aisles of Costco and Walmart can be just as treacherous as the plains and forests for those armed with a tight budget. I am a warrior, having braved crowded aisles with 4 small children in tow. My muscles ache with having pushed a shopping cart brimming over, first with restless children, then with groceries piled on top of these children who hop in and out and veer around and almost continuously topple the cart. And by the way, I would really like to see that deemed and recognized as a formal Olympic sport. Complete with sponsors. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. Yes, who sponsors this life, this race for a crown that cannot be lost amidst so many ways of losing our worth. And in my sweep through my day of buying and selling all sorts of things, and of chasing and yelling, of being busy, distracted, broken, and broke, and to top it all off, sweaty, I suddenly stop, arrested by an all-knowing stare. Through my kitchen window, directly in front of me, 2 golden eyes unblinkingly burn through me. He does not shift his gaze. I am aware of the dare to look back. He will not grow tired or weary in his understanding no one can fathom. This I do not understand. A great golden eagle has landed only a few feet from my back door. He is perched atop of the picnic table. Until this point, I've seen an eagle a handful of times in my life, soaring at a removed distance or hobbling about a cage in rehab, head bowed and feathers scraggly. And perhaps once or twice I've spied one briefly from the car on a cross-country drive, again at some distance, impersonal, removed, seemingly small, way up high in its tiny circles in the sky. But this one is up close, very close, and personal, very personal, and present, very present, staring right at me, and big, very big, not circling, not crying, not preening, not making a sound or a movement at all. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. In its presence I cannot breathe. None of us can. The children stand transfixed as well. No easy task. And even the toddler is suddenly hushed. What miracle is this? I live in an urban neighborhood near a campus. And sometimes we get the occasional deer or a squirrel, but never, ever an eagle. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. So often, the reality of suffering and brutality, of illness and tragedy, force us to ask all the old questions. Can a loving God let bad things happen? And where is God? And we're educating our children so that they can ask these questions, so that they can know our God is not a fragile God. And yet the cosmic counterpart murmurs too, what if God is there? And of course, for all that is bad, but also all that is good. Why? On my best days, on my how I feel in the church pew days, the questions shimmer and glimmer and they point me to him. But on the other days, on my not so Sabbath days, the questioning hurts. And then it tires and wearies. But sometimes my head asks and sometimes my heart. Sometimes like a Donne poem, both ask at the same time. A question can be a compliment, a pleasure, a burden, an itch that can't be scratched. And sometimes simply it can be a boomerang with a sharp edge. Even youths grow tired and weary and young men stumble and fall. And if you've ever seen an eagle up close and in its natural habitat, you will know of whence I speak. If you have not, let me tell you, you don't see an eagle, you experience one. And like T.S. Eliot's definition of a poem, it is an event. They are called king of the birds for a reason, and seeing an eagle is akin to seeing the feathered counterpart of a lion. And looking upon its strength makes one reevaluate one's own. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. The oldest questions glint double-edged. And these are the ones that truth and beauty invite us to turn like a coin in our hand. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Dare frame ours? Who dared make this winged creature whose gaze freezes me to the earth and suspends the usual commotion of my kitchen with a single turn of his head? I feel the blood course in the children's veins alongside my own. My husband, curious, walks into the silence from another room, and he stops next to me and joins us, wondering what is filling the picture in our window, and I hear his own intake breath, and he too says not a word. And we all stand at the window transfixed, clothed in something new somehow now, unable to move, to speak, to breathe from the holiness of it. And in my messy kitchen, time morphs into a shining bridge, freed of our downtrodden sense of it. Until, artfully, patiently, the eagle begins to arch its back for flight, and my husband reaches slowly for his phone, a very human impulse to catch what we cannot hold. But nothing can catch this, not even technology. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And the eagle stretches its wings with its terrifying exultation of an angel. And then in one great pulse, he flies towards the window, sweeping up at the last minute. Up, up, and over our heads. We all gasp and sway together as though seated at a 3D movie. And my husband races out the back door, hoping to film him cresting the roof. But although we can hear the rush of his wings, he is gone, and we are left in the wake of amazement. God is such a show-off. I set down the bag of little goldfish, and the packaging cheaply crankles into our golden eagled silence, and the children still point to where he was. Was he there? Could it have been just there, that empty space now? Our old picnic table, could it possibly bear witness to such a sight? A spot so humdrum in the midst of a backyard strewn with dead leaves, a wasteland caught between summer's former glory and as of yet unfallen Christmas snow? Could anything of such import come from such Nazareths? I turn and trip over the box of diapers, and although at times I may stumble and fall, and although I may be weary and weak, I am renewed. We are all renewed. I feel the promise of resurrection like an electric volt, still traveling and everlastingly settling within the room. Hope is the thing with feathers indeed, very large feathers in this case, and we are surprised out of ourselves, epiphanied into seeing things anew. And I remember this as I wrap gifts later, that the act of unwrapping is as much part of the gift as the giving itself. The eagle indeed has landed among us, and the wonder of it reminds us how to fly. To hold beauty in my soul's arms, yes, this is how St. John of the Cross characterizes the essence of all desire, the wonder of it. And Chesterton famously reminds us, I would maintain that thanks are the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. Wonder makes us the wisest of children and those most beckoned to the kingdom of God. Frederick Buechner reminds us when we tend to tip more towards the gravity than the joy of heaven, that when Jesus is asked who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he reaches into the crowd and pulls out a child with a cheek full of bubble gum and eyes full of whatever a child's eyes are full of, and says, unless you can become like that, don't bother to ask. Educating our children and keeping their wonder, nurturing their wonder, having them be aware and alert and long for that wonder. In closing, I will gift you with one following poem. Gift might be optimistic, but it's unwrapped just the same. I wrote it while on a walk with the earliest scent of spring in the air when we were living in this neighborhood. I pray that you'll enjoy it, and I pray that it will startle you into the unspeakable mercies of God as the miracle explosion startled me. I pray that as Aslan's mane is shaken, so will you be, awakened by glorious glints of eternity and alight with the fire of the Holy Spirit. For after emerging from the cold and necessary work of the tomb, in the burning bush of our hearts, there lives the dearest freshness, deep down things. Burning bush. As I round the corner on my morning walk, the sun catches them glinting among the leaves, golden sparks on greenery. A bush on fire. I am the catalyst. The explosion takes place as I pass. Clouds of golden finches burst forth, a fireworks display in celebration of this holy day. I welcome you to close in prayer with me. And I thank you for this time that you've welcomed me to join you and the privilege of being among all of you in your hearts for our God and our children. Dear Lord, please grant me wisdom, wit, and wonder. Surprise me and sustain me out of myself. Give me a discerning heart so that I may govern my life in steadfast remembrance of you. Let my conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt and a lamp to others, so that my words and my silences proclaim the mystery of Christ. And open my eyes that I may see wonderful things, from the grandeur of eagles to the glimmer of finches' wings. Amen.